church this morning, so anyone who is participating in that, you are welcome to be excused. For the rest of us, we will continue in John chapter 18. We'll pick up the story with Jesus going through his trial on the night in which he was betrayed. We will pick up at verse 28 of chapter 18. If you would all please stand, if you are able, for the reading of God's word. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters, so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusations do you bring against this man?" And they answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourself and judge him by your own law." And the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" And Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man to you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. You may be seated.
Jason, good morning, people of Grace. It's great to see you all. Welcome visitors and home folks alike. I'm glad to have you here for this next step in the Gospel of John. We're getting close to the end of this Gospel, as you know, as Jason just finished reading from chapter 18. So that leaves chapter 19, 20, and 21. As he just read to us, we have come to the time when Jesus has been placed on trial under the authority of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. This trial continues into chapter 19, which we'll deal with next week. We have a term that we use for a court case that seems to be out of control or unjust or unfair. We call it a kangaroo court. Recently, I thought about that term and I wondered where it came from. So I did some deep research by pushing the button on my phone and saying, "Siri, how did we get the term kangaroo court?" And Siri, in all of her wisdom, told me that the term seems to have come to use in England back in the day when the Brits took control of Australia and made it a penal colony. Britain was too small to house all of the criminals that were in England, and so they decided to start shipping their problem people down to the bottom of the world. down under to Australia. And once there, they would never have to deal with these criminals again. And according to the record, it was so convenient that they began convicting people right and left to send them off to live with the kangaroos. Thus, the term kangaroo court came into usage. Thank you, Siri. If you were with us last week, you might remember that Jesus already stood trial before the religious leaders of Israel. In fact, he stood trial 3 times. That's 3 times in one night and one morning. You may remember he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane at the beginning of this chapter, then taken to Annas, the old high priest emeritus of Israel. Annas, along with his 5 sons and his son-in-law, Caiaphas, ruled the Jewish religious world. We mentioned that he was like the godfather of Judaism. He was wealthy, powerful, and corrupt. Jesus stood before Annas late that night after the arrest in the garden. After standing before Annas, he was whisked off to his son-in-law, Annas' son-in-law, Caiaphas, who was the current high priest. This was also in the middle of the night. Never mind that both of these trials were illegal because they couldn't be held according to Jewish law in the night. They had to be held during daytime hours. And they couldn't be held without at least 2 witnesses to bring charges. In both cases, with Annas and with Caiaphas, they couldn't find witnesses who could agree on the charges against Jesus. So, case dismissed, right? Nope, not tonight. Annas is not worried about legal details, and neither is Caiaphas. This Jesus rabbi has got to be stopped. In fact, Caiaphas was the one who had said, if you remember, it is better for one man, Jesus, to die for the nation than for the nation to die because of Rome coming in to crush everyone. So he has to go, regardless of a few legal technicalities. So early in the morning, they take Jesus to the council. From Caiaphas, he goes to the council, or the Sanhedrin, as it's called. The Sanhedrin was a gathering of 70 religious and political leaders, Pharisees and Sadducees, and they were like the Supreme Court of Israel. They meet early the next morning. So it's 3 trials all in one night and one morning. Never mind that all of these trials were against the rules. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and this was definitely a kangaroo court. But the trials are not over. 3 is not enough. The next stop is Pilate. And as we've said, Pilate is the governor, the Roman governor of Judea. He represents Rome, and his court is for those accused of breaking the laws of Rome. And as we'll see in the next 2 weeks, there are 3 more Roman trials. Yes, 6 trials in a period of about 12 hours. Sound crazy? It's the ultimate kangaroo court. Jesus will face Pilate here, which Jason just read to us, for trial number 4. When Pilate learns that Jesus is from Galilee up in the north, he's relieved and decides to send him off to King Herod Antipas, who is the son of King Herod the Great. Antipas rules over Galilee up in the north, so Pilate sends him not up into Galilee, but Herod happens to be there for Passover, and he sends him across the way to face Herod for trial number 5. Herod Antipas is one of the wicked sons of the wicked King Herod the Great. Herod the Great is the one that killed the babies in Bethlehem. Herod Antipas is just one of his many sons who rule in different areas of the Middle East. And we're told by Luke that Antipas, Herod Antipas, is excited to see Jesus because he's heard all about him and he hopes to see Jesus do some kind of sign, Luke says. Or we might say a magic trick for him. But when Jesus won't play, he stands there silently, so Herod gets mad and sends him back to Pilate again for trial number 6. So what is going on here? Why are there so many trials? Well, the first 3 are religious trials in front of the high priest and the Jewish leaders. Jesus has been breaking all kinds of rules. He's been healing on the Sabbath. He's even claimed that he can forgive sins. And who can forgive sins but God, they ask. That's blasphemy. He's also been saying that God is his Father, and even that he and the Father are one. This is utter blasphemy. They've almost stoned him 2 or 3 times, but he's evaded them. They have to admit that he's done a lot of miracles that they can't explain, but they must be from the power of Satan rather than God. God cannot be pleased with this impostor, so he has to go. But the Jewish leaders have a problem. They are under the rule of the Roman authorities, and they are not allowed to put someone to death unless Rome agrees. And that's where Pilate comes in. As the Roman governor, he is the one that they must convince that Jesus is worthy of death. But Rome doesn't care about some preacher who's committing blasphemy. What is that to them? They're not going to kill a guy for preaching. So Pilate really doesn't care at one level. But as Caiaphas said, it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to perish. So the Jewish leaders have to find some way to convince Pilate that Jesus has to go. They are looking for a killing. So what's going on here? Well, on one level, this story is playing out like a great movie, only it's very real. But there are a couple of other levels to this. Number one, as we'll see in a moment, while Jesus is on trial and Pilate is asking a whole bunch of questions, it will become clear from Jesus' answers that Pilate, not Jesus, is the one on trial. The sermon today is called Pilate on Trial Before Jesus, Part 1. Part 2 is next week. We've talked many times about how Jesus is in control of these circumstances. In the garden, we talked about how he was in control when in verse 4 of chapter 18, John tells us that he knew everything that was going to happen to him. And he is sovereign over Judas. He is sovereign over the soldiers when they come in. And now he is sovereign over these judges in all 6 trials, because he is marching to the cross. He's not being dragged kicking and screaming to the cross. He said in chapter 10, verse 17 and 18, I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. Notice the words of my own accord. In other words, I'm in charge of my death. Notice the words, I have authority, 2 times. Authority to lay my life down and authority to take it up again. In other words, I am in charge of my death. No one takes it from my life from me. I'm even in charge of taking it up again. What's he mean there? Well, you need to show up on Easter Sunday to figure that out. But Jesus is in charge, and we'll see it's Pilate who is on trial here. There's one more thing I need to mention to us this morning and remind us of, and that is how John is telling the story. And for this, I need you to remember all the way back to when we started the Gospel of John. You know, like 2014 or sometime like that. Do you remember how in those early chapters we talked about how John brings out characters from behind the curtain, like on a big stage? The early disciples come out. John the Baptist comes out. And they begin to talk about Jesus and present him from their perspective. John the Baptist comes out and calls him the Lamb of God who will take away the sins of the world. The disciples start following Jesus instead of John. And Andrew tells his brother, Simon Peter, we have found the Messiah. And when another disciple, Philip, finds Nathanael, Nathanael is skeptical because he hears that Jesus is from Nazareth. And he says, can anything good come from Nazareth? And then Philip says, come and see. John is using these characters not only to tell their own story, but to talk to us in the audience. He wants us to come and see what's going to unfold in the rest of the book. Come and see who Jesus is. These characters are just like us. Some are excited, others are skeptical, others ignore it altogether. Well, the same thing is going on here at the end of the book. There are characters here in these last few chapters who are coming out from behind the curtain, and they are talking to us. It's time for Jesus to be on trial, and they are the jury. Who is this man? Really? Who is he? He's been making these outrageous claims. I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will not walk in darkness. I'm the bread of life. Whoever feeds on me will have life and will live. I'm like the bread that came down from heaven, the manna. But you need to live on the bread that I've brought from the Father, the bread that I am. Whoever eats my flesh, he says, will live. But whoever does not eat of me will die. I'm the good shepherd. I came to give you an abundant life. I and my Father are one. He goes on and on with these fantastic claims. So the jury is out saying, who is he? Jesus is on trial before these religious leaders. He's on trial now before political leaders. And he is on trial before the crowd. They're the jury and they're making up their minds. But along with them, you and me are in the jury. Who is this Jesus really? Do I buy what he's been saying? Do I side with the authorities or the crowds? They're all on trial. Now, I know when I say that, we're all Bible Belt people. So we all say, yeah, I like Jesus. Yes, he's all those things. I know that. I've known it since I was this high. But let me just quickly remind you that these people in the story are in the ultimate Bible Belt. They have been reading the Bible, the Old Testament, all their lives. They know about God. They know about the Messiah who's coming. They know all the stories. But many of them are missing him here. Many of them are hating him. So let's not be too quick to just jump on Jesus' side. Let's listen and participate in the jury as he is on trial for his life. We're going to see through these characters some really important principles in these last verses of chapter 18. The first thing we're going to see is we're going to see through the religious leaders, we're going to see the dangers of religion. If you have your Bible, have it open there to chapter 18. And notice in verses 28 to 32, the dangers of religion. Jason read how they led him from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters in the early morning. And then it says, they themselves, the religious leaders, did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. Notice the ironic twist that John gives us here in verse 28. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. One of the words that has shown up over and over and over again throughout the book of John is irony. This is irony in all caps. John is showing us the dangers of religion. And the first one that he shows us here is how religion, in quotes, can lead to hypocrisy. Incredible hypocrisy. Hypocrisy that is obvious to us when John writes it. But the people who are hypocritical don't see it at all. There is incredible hypocrisy here, and it's an incredible irony. Pilate was a Roman, and his headquarters, of course, were the house of a Gentile. The Passover week is in session, and in order to partake in the meals and celebrations that went all week, the Jews have to be clean. If they enter the home, or in this case, the headquarters of a Gentile dog like Pilate, they will be defiled, and they will not be able to participate with their families and with their friends in the meals and celebrations. Every Jew wants to be pure at Passover time. It's like our Christmas. You don't want to have to stay in your room when everybody else is opening up gifts. They realize we cannot go in there. We have to stay clean. These are the rules of religion for Jewish people. We see this later in the book of Acts when Peter is told by the Lord to go to the house of Cornelius. It was a Gentile. And Peter is up on the roof taking a nap, and he sees this vision of all these unclean animals. And a voice comes to him and says, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter says, "No, I've never eaten anything unclean. I don't want to be defiled." And then he finds out that the story is not about the unclean animals, it's about unclean people. Cornelius, who is a Gentile dog, but has a hunger for God. But that's still in the future. Here is a story where the Jewish people say, "I am not going to defile myself." So they get Pilate to come outside to them. It's interesting in this story, and we'll see it in a moment, that Pilate goes in and out, in and out, in and out. He doesn't care much for the Jewish people at all. We find out from history he had many encounters with them where he was ruthless and evil. But here he plays along with them and goes in and out to see Jesus and then comes out to them. Many of his questions for Jesus are asked behind the scenes because he understands they don't want to be defiled. But there's a problem. They don't want to be defiled by these Gentile dogs, but down inside of them, they are doing everything that is humanly possible to pull off a corporate murder of an innocent man. They've been plotting it for weeks, maybe months. They've broken the rules to find him guilty. And now they're coming to Pilate saying, "You've got to help us kill this man." Religion has a way of making us feel good about ourselves, what we can see, rules that we can keep that are having to do with washing our hands and other things like that. We keep the outside rules, show up at church, put money in the box, say your prayers, smile and look sanctified. But down inside can be anger, hatred, crookedness, even murderous thoughts sometimes. This is what Jesus warned the Pharisees about in Matthew chapter 15. He says, "Do you not see that whatever goes into your mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone." This got Jesus in a lot of trouble. But he is pointing out here the dangers of religion. We keep the external rules, but inside we are full of dead man's bones, he says in another place. This is what religion can do. It can cover up our real heart intent. But that's not all. It goes on to show in these next couple verses how religion can conceal your true motives. If you look further into the story here, in verse 29, it says, Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." Do you see what's going on here? First of all, they give Pilate a very general answer when he says, "What accusation, what charge do you bring against this man?" He's doing his legal duty there to say, if we're going to court, what is the charge? And they say, "This man is doing evil." Now just think about that a minute. In our own day, if you went downtown to the courthouse tomorrow and a trial is taking place and the judge says, "What are the charges?" And one attorney gets up and says, "Your Honor, this person here is doing evil." Do you think that's going to stand up in a general court in any country? That's about as abstract as you get. But they have been trying to nail him down for the last 12 hours with some kind of sin. They can't get anybody to agree on it. They finally have someone stand up. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us that someone finally stands up and says, "I heard him say he was going to tear down the temple and 3 days later build it again." They take a quote from Jesus totally out of context, but that's the best they've got because he's innocent. So all they can say is, "He's evil." And Pilate, who is known for being a judge, tells them that's ridiculous. Take him and do with him something in your own court. Don't waste my time with it. You don't even have a charge. But notice their true motives come out. The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." Do you see what they're admitting there? They're admitting, we haven't even started the trial, but he needs to be killed. And you're the man that can make it happen. The real motives are, we've got to have your help to get rid of this guy. Religion covers all this up. It's all external, but down inside, people are full of anger and hate and all kinds of things to get their way. Notice, though, the sovereignty, again, that reminds us that Jesus is in control. God the Father is in control. In verse 32, John inserts another little fulfillment verse that we've seen over and over again. There's more to it than just these Jews saying what they're saying. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show what kind of death he was going to die. You see, back in John chapter 3, when Jesus met with Nicodemus, he said, "Nicodemus, the Son of Man is going to be put up like the serpent on a pole in the wilderness, and he is going to give his life." Early in the book, he is already talking about the cross. It is God's will for me to be put up like the serpent on the pole. The Son of Man, that's what's going to happen to him. In chapter 12, just recently, he told them again, "If I am lifted up," which was a phrase for crucifixion, "I will draw all men to myself." So John is reminding us here that Jesus is marching to the cross. It is God's will. And even these wicked Jews with their hidden motives, their desire for murder, they are playing right into the will of God. Peter, in the book of Acts, will tell us later on Pentecost Sunday, when they are all gathered around, he will say that God foreordained that his Son will be murdered, crucified on a cross. That's the sovereignty side. And then he comes to the human responsibility side and says, and you, with wicked hands, have done it. Jesus is in control of dying and of raising again. Religion is dangerous. Let's switch to America for a few minutes. It's not just true in Judea, in Jerusalem. A lot of people want to be religious to cover the bases. But religion will not clean your heart. Religion covers up. Religion assures someone with false security, I'm okay. I'm better than the next guy. I pay my dues. Religion is dangerous. It sends people to hell. So that's just a little ironic warning from John as we begin this part of the story. Religion can cover our deep spiritual darkness. That's the lesson from this part of the story. Not only do we want to talk about the dangers of religion, but then we go into the dilemma of Pilate in these next verses 33 to 38. Pilate is going to ask a series of questions here. We already looked at one where he begins by saying, what is the accusation? That's his legal question to ask. But then he begins to zero in on who this man is in front of him. His first question is, in verse 33 is, are you the king of the Jews? It's very interesting that in all four Gospels, this phrase is exactly the same, and the word you in the sentence in Greek is emphatic. You say, what do you mean by that? It is a way of saying, are you the king of the Jews? You? Pilate has heard about this Jesus figure, of course, and he's probably heard all the stir that's going on as he's come to Jerusalem for the Passover. He lived over in Caesarea, but he came in because of the stir up that can happen with the Jewish people. They were always there with all their soldiers at times like this. So he's heard about Jesus. But now he's looking at him after he has been drugged out of the garden and on trial all night, and he looks at this pitiful looking man and says, are you the one? Are you the one I've heard about, the king of the Jews? You're a king? And Jesus answers in verse 34, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? What is Jesus saying here? He's saying, did the Jewish people tell you I was king of the Jews, or did you hear it somewhere else? And he's starting to penetrate into Pilate here. Pilate, what are you thinking? Where'd you get your information? Who do you think that I am? You remember back in Matthew chapter 16 where Jesus is with his disciples and he stops and says, who do men say that I am? And they say, some people think you're Elijah resurrected. Some people think you're a great prophet. Some people think this. Some people think this. And then he says, who do you say that I am? This is very similar to what he's saying to Pilate. What do you think about me, Pilate? I'm on trial here, but I'm going to get personal with you. And again, Pilate is someone who comes out from the curtain to give us his opinion, his perspective. And as we are watching from the audience, we are part of the jury as well. He goes on to say, Pilate answers sarcastically, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and your chief priest have delivered you over to me." In other words, this is a Jewish problem. I've got to be here because it's my job, but I don't like you people and I don't want to mess with you. Just answer my questions. And then he goes to the next question. What have you done? This is a question where he's trying to figure out something has got to be going on underneath all of this. This is not just a religious debate. These people want you dead. What did you do? What is really at the base of this? He's digging in like a good prosecuting attorney as well as a judge to say, there's got to be some problem with you. But again, the problem is, the only thing they can come up with is he's an evildoer. He heals on the Sabbath. He heals a blind man. He heals a lame man that's been lame for 38 years. But it was on the Sabbath. He's evil. What did you really do? Pilate is trying to get to the bottom of it. Notice Jesus' answer here. Pilate asks some really good questions, and he even gets to some good answers, but we're going to see he doesn't make a good decision. But along with Pilate's questions, we see Jesus' answers, and he takes Pilate to a deeper level. Pilate is saying, what have you done? You would expect Jesus or any one of us to say, I haven't done anything. I'm innocent. Get me out of here. But Jesus isn't worried about that. What he wants Pilate to know is what kind of king he is. He says in verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. Notice how he repeats that. He really wants Pilate to get this. I am not interested in the political game. I am not trying to be a king who sits on a throne and enjoys life at the expense of everyone else. My kingdom is not anything that you would recognize of this world. In other words, I have come to bring a spiritual kingdom. This is why he rebukes Peter for defending him and cutting off Malchus's ear. Peter, as we talked about the last couple of weeks, is acting bravely. He's trying his best to defend Jesus, but Jesus says, Peter, put your sword away. That is the kingdom of this world. That's the way this world operates. But those who live by the sword die by the sword in this world. That is not my plan of operation. I am here to bring a spiritual kingdom that makes kingdom citizens new people from the inside out. That's something that Pilate knows nothing about. My kingdom is not from this world. So that leads Pilate to another question in verse 37. So you are a king. He may have exclaimed it that way, or a question, so are you a king? But the idea is, let's get to the bottom of this. What kind of king are you? Pilate cannot understand this kind of language. He's a material man. Jesus is talking about a spiritual kingdom. Pilate is all about materialism, about position, power. Pilate actually married into the family of Caesar Augustus. He married Caesar Augustus's granddaughter. And that's why he's in this position. And he's doing his best to stay in this position. That's what kings and material rulers do. But Jesus says, I came as a spiritual king. Notice his answer here. You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into this world. Now think about that answer from Jesus. What is he getting at? He came with a purpose. But notice he says, I was born for a purpose, and I came into this world with a purpose. He is showing the humanity side that I was born for a purpose. All of us have a purpose in life, but none of us can say, I was born for a purpose. I was born because my mom and dad loved each other and they created children. But no one in my family thought, I've got a purpose in bringing this boy into the world. The purpose was just kind of like, Timmy, I hope you do good. We're going to try to bring you up in the way you should go. But nobody had a preconceived idea of purpose in my birth or yours. We just came along. But Jesus says, I was born with a purpose. But I also came into the world. Over and over again through this book, he has reminded them, the Father sent me to do his will. That's why I'm here. The purpose is to bring glory to my Father by marching to the cross. So Jesus is telling him what kind of king he is. And then he says the word that just sends Pilate over the edge. I came for the purpose to bear witness to the truth. We talked a few weeks ago when we were talking about the unity that Jesus is praying for in John 17, that it is a unity based on the truth. Sanctify them, Father, in your truth. Your word is truth. And we talked about how this word truth shows up over and over again in the book of John. Ideally, supremely, in John 14, verse 6, where Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. If there's any part of this Pilate story that we ought to be able to connect to as 21st century Americans, it's the question of truth. Jesus says, I came to bear witness to the truth. And everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. This is another interesting way of saying things, because Jesus has been talking about over and over again how God draws us to himself. No one comes to the Father except the Father draw him in John 6:44. But there's also this personal responsibility. And in John 7, Jesus says, those who seek the truth will find that I speak the truth. And here he's saying, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. My disciples listen to me and they're open to truth. But those who don't know nothing of truth. Pilate gives another sarcastic answer here, the ultimate one. What is truth? And the interesting thing about this is, it says, after he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews. Pilate doesn't stick around to hear an answer to his question. What is truth? And then he walks out. What a time to walk out of the most important question you've ever asked. Here you are staring at the truth in person, the truth of God that has come down to save the world. And you are in the jury deciding, Pilate, is this man who he says he is? What do I say about this man? Is he for real, or is he just a man on an ego case? What is truth, he says, and he walks out. But that question lingers in the air for each one of us, because we live in a culture that says, there's your truth, there's my truth, don't bother me with yours, I won't bother you with yours, it's all relative. And that is the biggest lie of our culture that we get sucked into even as believers. So when Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, that is exclusive. That is something that separates people. That sounds like egotism. But Jesus says, it's true. That's who I am. And will you believe it? Pilate says, no thanks. I'm a material man. I'm not going to get into all of that. He goes outside, and this is where it's really fascinating. For the first time, he answers his critics by saying, I find no guilt in him. Pilate is going to make this statement 3 times, as we'll see next week. He asks good questions, and he comes to the right answer 3 times. But as we know, his decision is deliver him up to be crucified. This leads to the final question from Pilate is, do you want me to release the king of the Jews? After he says, I find no guilt in him, he says, you have a custom, you Jews, that I should release someone to you at Passover. It was a procedure that they did to help the crowd enjoy the ceremonies. They let a prisoner go free. And Pilate is in this dilemma between the chief priest and religious leaders who are pressuring him, and then the crowd outside who are all partying and hanging around to see what's going on. And he sees an opportunity here, apparently, to be able to open it up for discussion. If the crowd buys into this offer, then he's off the hook. He just tells the priest, I'm sorry, but the crowd said they wanted their king. And so he hollers out, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? But their answer back is, no, we want a substitute. Not this man, but Barabbas. And Barabbas was a robber, it says. Barabbas was one of the Jewish people who stirred up a riot, and the other gospel writers tell us that he not only was a robber, but he murders someone or someones in this practice. It's the word used for an instigator, a troublemaker. And they say, we'd rather have the troublemaker than this spiritual king. Give us Barabbas. He's one of us. He's a homeboy. He hates Rome. We hate Rome. But it's a disgusting substitute. It's very interesting, this guy's name. In Aramaic, which they spoke, Bar means son, like Bartimaeus, the blind man, the son of Timaeus. Barnabas is the son of encouragement, we read in the book of Acts. Bar is the son of Abbas, which is from Abba. He's the son of a father. Of course, everybody's the son of a father, but it's the son of his father. There's great irony here again, because he is the substitute for the son of the father. He is their desire for someone to be among them, not this one who is a son of a father with a spiritual kingdom and all of these religious ideas. The crowd gets swept away and cries out, not him. We'll take the substitute. It's interesting, the word robber here is used in John 10, where Jesus talks about he's the good shepherd. And he says in verse 1 and verse 8, there are robbers that have come in to try to steal the sheep. But I am the good shepherd who knows my sheep by name, who lays down my life for my sheep. I came to give you abundant life. But there are people who are robbers, who are substitutes for what life is about. And he came to protect us from them. This is the word used for Barabbas. But he's a pathetic substitute. He's laying in a prison that he made for himself by murdering people. But they want him more than they want the Son of the Father. Here's the real substitution that makes Jesus who he is. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 5, for our sake, he, God the Father, made him, Jesus the Son, to be sin who knew no sin. He never experienced what it was to have a guilty conscience. He never experienced giving in to temptation. He never was blemished with those sins that are surrounding us every minute of every day. He knew nothing of it. So that in him in Christ, the Son of the Father, we might become the righteousness of God. This is the great exchange. He who knew no sin took on sin and became sin on the cross. He doesn't just have sins, but he becomes a whole sinful person in the eyes of the Holy Father. And we, sinners, become the righteousness of Christ. When God looks at us, he sees the substitute instead of us. This is the message that Pilate missed, the religious leaders missed. But the people coming out from the curtain are asking us, what do you see in this man? What will you do with him? Will you follow him? Let's pray.